first of all, bereavement is an event. And as an event, it is really a biopsychosocial event. And symptoms accompany this event. When I say bereavement as an event, I am talking about it as a loss where there is an actual absence of the person, a finality to that absence. The bereavement event, depending on the circumstances, will lead to certain kinds of behavior and symptoms. Many people do not understand it is not a one-time event that somebody gets over. I personally believe nobody really gets over the loss of what we call a primary libidinal bond. That's someone who you have a deep attachment to, a primary caretaking figure, a lover, a child. One does not get over these losses. Even though many mourning rituals are considered between 6 months and a year. You know, someone should be over it. It doesn't work that way. What I believe takes place is an adaptation to the loss, if you're fortunate to be able to have the wherewithal to do that. George Engel realized that bereavement is much like a disease. It has to begin, it's experienced in the central nervous system. What Engel saw was, why do people who suffer grief seem to come down with illnesses and disease? What Lindemann saw was suffering that needed to be treated. So that was already a far cry from Freud, who said, well, you don't interfere with grief and bereavement. It'll heal on its own. Lindemann was a very observant psychiatrist. He said, people need to talk about what has happened to them. So he was addressing some of the trauma. He identified the acute aspects of a loss reaction that till this day are accurate. Myron Hofer, H-O-F-E-R, he brought it a step further, and he says there's some regulatory dysfunctioning that happens in bereavement. Again, remembering that it's a biopsychosocial event. Now, what he did that was a little different from what we learned from Lindemann. Lindemann talked about the acute changes, the things that you see in the first weeks, the first months. What Hofer started to realize was there are longer-term changes. And I think this is what many people don't realize. It's like someone exposed to a virus. Once you're exposed to it, you have it. You're changed. The brain is changed. It's now coping with a stressful life event that produces certain stressful hormones that have a cascade of events. Now you take that into the context of what the personality was like before, which is my contribution, that you have to understand who the person is before you. What has been their life history? What was the circumstance of the loss itself? What was the nature of the relationship? You have to know all these things. One of the things that has not really been acknowledged enough is the many ways that functioning is interrupted in a pair bond. The things we take for granted that keep the interpersonal functioning on some sort of homeostatic basis. And that interruption sort of sets off what I call the grief ordeal. You're suddenly without the kind of identity you had, the kind of gratifications you had, the kind of role that you had. It stops. Now, in the beginning of any kind of loss, whether you know it's going to happen or not, there's a shock, there's a trauma, appetite's affected, sleep disturbances. These are autonomic nervous system activities that are changed. There's a cascading of events on this biological, psychological, and social level, and it depends where you are developmentally and in the life cycle. If we look at childhood losses, childhood is usually broken up into stages. Generally, when a loss occurs with a young child, they lose functions. So if there's an abandonment by the mother or a death, they will regress and lose whatever is most learned. So let's say they're a toddler and they achieved walking. Maybe they'll go back to crawling or not moving as much. They lose functions with the absence of the object in their life. Now, what other effects or what other interventions in the immediate environment that can help will make a difference. But that child has had the loss of that figure who, depending on the quality of the relationship, which I'm assuming is good enough, is a total disruption. When there are early losses for people who never got help or mourned or grieved properly, it is there in some form. And I'll see adults who have had early losses. And in analysis, you have an opportunity to work more deeply and get back to some of these early things, which I have helped people do. It's there. It's in the mind and the body what has happened. Now again, other factors come in. How good the father is. You know, if the father's going through his own grieving process, he may or may not be as available to his child. So then you get another kind of loss. What if there's more than one sibling? Each one experiences it differently. Are there extended family that come in and provide nurturing? What one has to remember is there's real dependence with children. So their needs have to be met. Now, adolescence, that presents a whole unique problem in and of itself. Because if you have a model of development, which we believe adolescence is a time when you're trying to separate from your family of origin to begin with. So if you have a real loss at that time, it can be very dangerous to the psyche. So you may see psychotic breaks in certain vulnerable adolescents. Their hormones are kicking in, and their sexuality and aggression become very frightening. The loss of the parent at that time really overthrows the ego in another way.